Well, hello, this is Jeff Gaudiosi, and you're on misplacedstraws.com where music comes to life. And my guest today is a businessman, an author, a photographer, a podcaster, and perhaps the best historian there is on the early years of Guns N' Roses. On July 21st, the anniversary of Appetite's release, he'll be hosting a photo exhibit called The First 50 Gigs, Guns N' Roses and the Making of Appetite for Destruction at the Bourbon Room in Hollywood, California. Please welcome Marc Canter. Welcome, Marc.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Oh, my pleasure. So, before we get into your history with Slash and the band and all that, let's talk about this photo exhibit. It ties into your book and the podcast and video series that you've done, but what can fans expect when they come on the 21st?
Well, there's a lot of photos. There's probably like 30, 40 photos that are going to be up in the exhibit, and there's going to be a lot of I call them artifacts. They're just souvenirs from the old days, original flyers, ticket stubs, maybe the Slash's that handwritten tattoo that he got on his arm. Just a lot of things that I held on to over the years and you can see them in person. Just any kind of cool, fun stuff I have. But the photos are cool because there's so much history with these photos that I documented. There's 12 songs off Appetite for Destruction. 10 of them, I was there the first time they ever debuted them. So there could be photos that the first time they ever played Welcome to the Jungle or Sweet Child of Mine or Rocket Queen or something like that. So it's just, if that's one of the songs that makes it, works for you and like your favorite song, it's cool that you'll have a chance to see, photos from that gig. Or some of the photos are not even in my Reckless Road book that I put out in 2008. There is 900 images in that book, which is more than enough, but I have about 15,000 images. So they all originally, when I put together this project in 1993, 1994, it had 2,000 photos in it. And then we edited it down to 900. So there's obviously, if I had 2,000, then that means, more than half came out. So some of those photos will be the ones that aren't maybe not in the book. And it's really to make awareness of what we're really promoting, which is the project of the First 50 Gigs, which coincidentally, that was the name of Reckless Road before it became Reckless Road. My manuscript said Guns N' Roses, the First 50 Gigs, because that's what it is. It covers the first 50 gigs. So, this podcast, what we're really trying to promote, really digs in deeper than anything can ever, because you could, first of all, when we were doing the book, we had MySpace, and MySpace was about what you could find people on MySpace. We don't have Facebook and the engine. Now you can just Google someone and find them. Back then in 2007, 2008, you didn't have you had internet, but you didn't have as good of an internet as you have now, thorough. So for instance, we didn't have Rob Gardner, who was the original drummer from LA Guns and Guns N' Roses. He would have loved to have been involved in the book, but we couldn't find him at the time. So now we have him, you get his story, but not only would you get his story, you get really intimate details about exactly how things went down, not just a few quotes. And so you have time in a podcast, you have time to go in 40 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever it takes to get the job done. When you're doing that information for a book, there's only so much room on the page to put little blurbs. And so we even went back and we got Chris Webber, who was a guitar player in Hollywood Rose, and wrote songs with, Axl and Izzy. And yeah, he's in the book, but he's not thoroughly in the book. So you really get the history of the Sunset Strip. We did with Laurie Jacobson that goes back from 1900 to 1950. You'd think, how is that relevant? But it is, because it sets the stage for how the Sunset Strip became for people that in any state in the United States, if they want to make it, they got to come to Los Angeles. They got to hit the Sunset Strip. They got to put flyers up on the wall. They got to do all those things. They got to mingle around the rainbow. So basically, you're getting this all happened because when I was working with Jason Porath, who was my co-author and technically the publisher, because it was self-published for Reckless Road. The deal was that we would also do some sort of documentary, because I had all this video footage, all this audio, and all this, all this information you can't just put it in a book and get it all. You need another platform for that. So we agreed on doing some sort of documentary, but it never really happened. And during the pandemic, when people were working from home and Zooming, it became very popular to Zoom. So Jason had this idea: let's do what we never finished, and do a podcast instead of a documentary. And we started doing it by Zoom, and it worked. And honestly, even if there wasn't a pandemic, I think it worked out better than it would have if it was a documentary, because you have Jason, you have me, you have whoever the guest is, and we're all talking about, Jason knows, he's an expert of getting information out of people and not looking for sensationalism. So he'll ask a question, and then we'll both jump on it and try to like fill in the holes. And it's just you get a lot of details. I get I know exactly what went down. I still get goosebumps when I watch this, because I'm looking at it through other people's eyes. And I know I grew up an Aerosmith fan. And if somebody had documented Aerosmith the way I documented Guns N' Roses, they would be my best friend. So it's an interesting story. I've said this in my book, even if you're not a fan of the band, it's still so interesting to see how those 5 guys came together and made it work, and what they had to do to get to the next level. So, it gig by gig. So that's what we are. But back to the Bourbon Room, which is we're doing on July 21st, is the exhibit. It's fun to look at exhibits anyways. When you blow up these photos and you frame them nice and you have them on the wall, and it's just so much better. It pops out at you rather than just looking at it in a book or on the internet. And, there'll be a little card under each one that says something. This may be what happened. That gig was at their first sold out gig. It just gives you a little bit more. It was first time Slash used a Les Paul. So it's informative, and it's fun. It's fun to gather in with a room full of a bunch of people that are all interested in the same subject. And you meet new friends, and you see old friends you haven't seen in a long time. And it's just a cool event.
And again, you were there, your history with the band is well documented. You and Slash were friends from the time you were kids, and you kind of saw something special and began documenting all of that. But I mean, hindsight is always something else. So like now, you look back like, you're there at the first time Guns N' Roses steps on stage at the Troubadour in June of '85. But do you remember what you felt watching those 5 guys perform that very first time? Did it feel like something special? Or, I mean, there were a million bands around at the time, but they kind of stood out. What do you think made them stand out?
Well, okay, that's a 5-part question.
Yeah.
All 5 parts of that. First of all, I had a history with Axl, a history with Duff, Slash, obviously, and also Steven. So, because Steven and Slash and Axl were in Hollywood Rose a year before that gig. The difference was Steven was still playing double bass, and it was like a speed metal band. And you knew there was something there, but you just couldn't pull it out. There just wasn't enough to make it stick together and make it work. And a year later, when they ran across that course again, and that opportunity came when Tracy Guns and Rob Gardner left the band because Duff had booked this tour to Seattle, and they really weren't interested in going up to that, Seattle and Portland. And also Axl and Tracy had a little something going on about maybe musically or a song or whatever. There was a little tension there that was looking to boil over. So there was a lot going on. But when that opportunity came again, of course, I knew it was good because I knew who Axl was. I knew who Duff was because he was briefly in Road Crew, which was Slash and Steven's band, for about a week. And they actually worked on a song that eventually became Rocket Queen. So there was a little history there. Duff didn't stick around because there wasn't a singer. And I think Duff wanted to hit the ground running, and they didn't want to build a band from scratch and do all, they hung out for a week and that was it. But anyways, Izzy, I knew briefly because Slash and I and Steven went to see Hollywood Rose because Slash was interested in either getting Axl and Izzy in his band or joining their band. Either way, it wouldn't matter. And it happened, except Izzy took a left turn right away. As soon as Slash joined, Izzy left and joined that band London. That other people were in Wasp, members of Wasp was in there, Motley Crue. A lot of people. London was a stepping stone. But anyways, so I knew who Izzy was. And I knew he was a good songwriter, and I knew he helped set the image in a lot of things. So, but what I didn't know is how good it was going to be. And yes, even though they were my friends, and even though I knew how good they were, especially Slash, I promoted everything Slash did. They blew me away because they removed, Izzy and Duff removed one of Steven's bass drums when he went to the bathroom or went to have a cigarette, whatever it was, at that rehearsal, and they hid it. I mean, they literally like took it a block away and hid it somewhere. And so Steven had no choice. But all of a sudden, that speed metal band turned into this funky punch that Steven had that fit that music perfectly. And so now, I see Don't Cry for the first time. They had played it with Tracy, but I didn't see any of those gigs. So first time I saw it is really the first time they played it with Slash. And the guitar solo is the same as you hear on the record. So at that rehearsal, Slash ripped one out, it fit, and he remembered it and played it that night. And then it worked, so he played it the next time. So, that song alone blew me away, because as good as Axl was, I knew he was, I didn't realize he had 5 different registers of Axls, Axl levels, and each one being just as good as the next, but different. So, I remember hearing Don't Cry, listening to it in my car after the show, because I recorded all those shows. And I just couldn't believe it. I thought this could be like a soundtrack in a movie. The band is ready to go. I mean, just on this song alone, and we'll see what comes from it. But, so being back at that gig, I shot 4 rolls of film, and I didn't just shoot Slash and a little bit of everyone else. I shot equal amounts of everybody, because everybody was warranting that attention. Izzy would look just like a rock star. I mean, they all looked, wherever I pointed the camera, the finger pulled the trigger, because there was something there. A lot of times you shoot a show and you look and you look and you don't pull the trigger, and you look for something else, and finally you pull the trigger. This, I burned off 4 rolls of film without an automatic rewinder. That's taking a picture and then clicking the thing and then taking a picture. So imagine they got a 35-minute set, and I shot 4 rolls of 36 film. So that means there was a lot to shoot. And guess what? I ran out of film. I probably could have shot 6 rolls, but that's how good it was. And it was like, wow, that really worked. I mean, of course it was going to work even how it was before, but now you got Duff and you got Izzy. It's different than Hollywood Rose was. And so that gig alone blew me away. And it was something so different. It was just, I heard some of those songs before, like, Anything Goes, and a couple of actually Moved to the City they played that night, and Think About You, and those 2 songs I heard, and those were pretty much good songs too to listen to in your car after the show or the next day. And soon after that, they wrote Welcome to the Jungle. Was the first song they actually wrote as Guns N' Roses. I mean, as that Appetite for Destruction lineup. And again, the guitar solo sounds the same as it did that night than it does on the record. So I knew right then and there, they're like a mini Led Zeppelin. I mean, they can't do wrong. They had all these good songs, and now they write a new song. Then they wrote Rocket Queen 2 months later. Then they wrote Paradise City a month later. Then, next was Night Train and My Michelle. And so there wasn't any throwaways. Every song they wrote was produced and arranged and sounded great, just the way they wrote it. So, usually when you get a band that has some talent, it needs some polishing in the studio by a professional that knows how to pull the best out of them. Well, in Guns N' Roses' case, the professional was Mike Klink, understanding not to change things, that they have it. They have what they have is great. Now just to capture it and juggle them, make sure they show up on time and do all that other stuff and babysit them. But it was a team. You had Tom Zutat from Geffen that was smart enough to not only sign them, of course anyone should have signed them, but smart enough to know not to screw with the songs they had and not try to make them marketable, and clean up the bad language or whatever. So you have a song like It's So Easy, and there's some things in there that most record companies might not let you have. And Tom said, nope, put it in there, leave it alone. It's all good. So it took that combination. Plus, he's the one that after they looked through, a bunch of failed producers, he came up with Mike Klink. So it was having the right people to get them to the next level is what it took. But yes, that first show really, really showed me that this is going to work. And I made it my point to make sure Slash gets to the next level, one way or the other. Just whatever, making it easy, driving him out to another city to look at an amp or a guitar he's looking at, or support him on something something he's got his target on. When doing a gig, help promote it by flyers or an ad in a magazine or just whatever, food. Odds and ends, just to make it a little smoother. I didn't help them write any music, but I helped them get to the next level. Although there is something I will take a little bit of credit for. Slash was outrageous on a wah-wah pedal in 1981, 1982. They used to do a cover of Dazed and Confused, and he would just even Jimmy Page would have tipped his hat off to the 16-year-old that was doing this. That wah-wah pedal broke, and that was the end of that. And we never saw it again. And he went through 85 without the wah-wah pedal. And I remember it was his birthday's in July, and I decided, he didn't ask for the wah-wah pedal, but I just decided that maybe we'll get him a wah-wah pedal. And he was so good at it. Let's see what's going to happen. Well, sure enough, the next month they show up with, Sweet Child of Mine and Brownstone in the same gig. They debuted that August 23rd at the Whiskey. And both those songs have wah-wah pedal, and both those songs are very memorable. We'll be long gone, and people will still be listening to those songs. And so I don't know if they would have sounded like that without that wah-wah pedal. I mean, sure, they would have been good, obviously.
It's different, yeah.
Paradise City doesn't have a wah-wah pedal. Welcome to the Jungle doesn't have a wah-wah pedal network. So I'm sure whatever Slash would have done would have worked, but it wouldn't have had that wah-wah pedal. So that was the only thing I contributed towards the music, I guess, by making sure he had that wah-wah pedal. But one other gig that was kind of memorable to me was they played the Street Scene, actually twice, but one of them was September 28th of 1985. It's a free gig on the streets of downtown Los Angeles. And they were supposed to open up for Social Distortion, and they were going to go on at 5 or 5:30. It was 8 o'clock when they took the stage because the day was running late. And the native punkers were not having that. They were ready. If Guns N' Roses was 3 hours late, that means Social Distortion was also 3 hours late. And they had enough watching these bands that aren't who they came to see. And when they came on, they was like, and they were like throwing food and spitting at them and shaking the stage and doing whatever they could to get Guns off the stage. It was only a 5-song set list, but Guns basically won that crowd over. And it was that gig when I saw them perform in front of probably 2,000 people, but it looked like 20,000 people to me because I'd never seen a crowd that big for them playing. Sure, I've been to like arenas and seen, 18,000 people, but I haven't seen that my friends play on a stage bigger than 200 or 300 at the Troubadour. So to see them control that out of control crowd, and then not only that, have them eating out of their hands by the third song, showed me that not only do they have the songwriting and the vocal range and the guitar playing and the right image, they also had the ability to captivate an audience that wasn't even there to see them. In fact, not only were they there to see them, they wanted to see them off that stage. But so that told me after that gig, and I even took pictures from behind the stage to show how crazy and rowdy it was. So you're looking at the backs of the band and then the front of the crowd. And it was just like, it was like, as far as I'm concerned, it was like Woodstock, it was just like an insane thing. And it made me realize that they are a stadium band. And of course they were, they ended up being a stadium band, but not every band, there's a lot of bands that can write good music, but they're not really great performers. And Guns N' Roses was one of the last of the bands where you could buy a poster of them and identify exactly all the members in the band, like you did in the 70s. You bought the Kiss poster or Black Sabbath or whatever, Van Halen or Led Zeppelin or whatever. You could identify everyone in the band, and they look that influenced you to hang them on your wall. Today, there's music out there that you might listen to and like and enjoy, but you're not going to hang up a
Mhm.
poster because there's nothing to see.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That we kind of lost that. So they came at a time when the music industry was the rock and roll, hard rock, whatever you want to call it, was gone. I mean, the 70s were gone, the 60s were definitely gone. The early 80s punk and late 70s, early 80s punk kind of died off by 82. And there was just nothing going on. And these guys were making music for themselves of what, in their opinion, of what music should sound like today, or that, people weren't doing anymore. But it was also the perfect mix and the right time because forget about the music, the lyrics
Mhm.
were coming from the way they were living. They were living on the streets, hanging out, and maybe they'd sleep at a girlfriend's house or in someone's couch or in the backseat of someone's car. But sometimes they'd strike out, they'd have to sleep on the street or in their studio, which was not meant to be slept in and was very tiny. And they'd have wild parties there, and the police were chasing them. So yeah, you had something besides musically, and besides the fact nobody really showed up with a song and then everyone kind of put a cherry on it. As a song was being written by one or a riff, the other ones would grab onto it and build on it instantly. So it wasn't this one wrote it or that one wrote it. It was a product of 4 or 5 minds looking at that and ripping it up. Whoever came up with the main idea, it's still there, but everything else got other people's ideas got put on it. And later on, they still had magic, but not that same magic. The magic was later on, they all had enough money to have their own apartments, and maybe they had a 4-track studio or whatever. Somebody could put a song on a cassette and give it to the band, and then they could build on it. And, that might happen. But the way songs were structured in those days, they were literally built right then and there. And there was something about that made it special. I almost wish if I could go back in time that maybe I wish they wouldn't have gotten signed in March of '86, and maybe another 6 months later, because they would have been on. Once they got signed, the only thing they had focused on doing was putting out the record, recording the songs they already had, which they knew were good, and getting them out there. But the record company thought they might need 1 or 2 more songs and told them to write more songs. And all of a sudden they couldn't write songs when they were told to write songs. They were writing songs naturally. So yes, Sweet Child of Mine, Sweet Child of Mine and Brownstone, and also It's So Easy and You're Crazy came after they got signed, but not for many months. There was a lot of chaos going on, and it almost they could have either gotten dropped, gone to jail, died, whatever, broken up, just because of friction or whatever. They tore through their advance money in like 2 weeks, and then they were on the reckless road. That's why my book was called Reckless Road, because it was written about that time of after they got signed, before they got the record out. It was a little crazy there. So that was a special time, and that kind of, that's lightning in a bottle. That doesn't, you could put those 5 guys back in a room right now and they're not going to write material like they did then. Sure, whatever they write may be good, but it's not going to be like that. And that happened because they were in the right place at the right time with the right intentions. They were all on the same page, and they clicked. And I've said this before, you can't take those 5 members and divide them up by 100% what their values were. Because right away, you have to give Slash 50% and Axl 50%. There's your 100%. But wait a minute. Can Slash and Axl make that work on their own? Absolutely not. You needed Izzy, you needed Duff, you definitely needed Steven. If you add their percentages together, you're going to come up with 200%. So it's like putting 5 completely different chefs in the same kitchen. Normally they'd kill each other. But in this instance, they worked as a perfect team of assassins to create really good music that will last forever.
And the exhibit, the first 50 years, June 21st at the Bourbon Room in Hollywood. Any plans on taking this on the road at all, or is this just a one-time exhibit?
Well, anything can happen. For right now, I mean, there are some cool things that I have that we'll see what kind of response we get from that. I just have a bunch of original items that you know, people go and they see Van Gogh, they see King Tut, they see all these things to see these artifacts. But I know these things aren't millions of years old or whatever, but, you know, or whatever, a couple 100,000 years old. But it is still cool that they're here and they exist. People might want to see them in person and might want to see these images that aren't even in the book or available online. You know, we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I mean, right now, the main reason was to put this out to get the event started about bringing awareness to the podcast. Because in the end, it's a means to the end to get to the podcast. We're trying to get the message out that this podcast exists. You know, Spotify and Patreon and wherever I guess wherever you can get podcasts at. If you go to first50gigs.com, you can get information on how it will point you to the podcasts that you might be able to have access to. Everyone has different accesses with different equipment. But that's the whole thing, is to make awareness of the podcast. And, you know, this podcast was done so well, and it was produced so well with the right people working on it that you could just take it and put it right onto Amazon or right onto, you know, Hulu or one of those, you know, Netflix, and it's ready to go. People could watch this right from their TV. And it's done professionally, with nobody winged it. It was Jason put together a really good team of people. And, you know, they had meetings every single week for hours and talking about how they're, you know, every little detail, how they're going to do it and structure it out and film it and record it and the right microphones and, you know, to make it look like, you know, because Jason's like a filmmaker. So he wants to make it as, you know, he doesn't want to skimp on quality.
Yeah. And it really is well done. I've listened to it. I haven't had a chance to see the video component, but the audio is amazing. And we've been spending some time here today with Marc Canter. Again, the podcast and the photo exhibit are both called The First 50 Years, Guns N' Roses and the Making of Appetite for Destruction. If you're in Hollywood, California on July 21st at the Bourbon Room, you could see all this in person. If not, as Marc said, the podcast is available everywhere. I know you still have some books on your website too, for people that kind of want to go back to the beginning of it. And it's a great story, and we're lucky to have it all documented. So Marc, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
All right. Also, you said first 50 years. It's first 50 gigs.
50 gigs.
50 gigs. And you can find, I'm Marc Canter, so you can find me at marccanter.com. And there's also recklessroad.com if you want to look for the book. And that's it.
Thank you so much, my friend. Best of luck with the photo exhibit. Hopefully the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame takes notice of that exhibit and puts it up there. That would be the goal.
They actually did. I loaned them some things they had it for a couple of years, but they eventually sent it back for whatever reason. But yeah, I did have some things there.
Great. Best of luck on the 21st, Marc.
Thank you. See you later.
Thank you.